Hello and welcome to our Bible study today. We're on a journey through the Bible and today we're part 2, Exodus. Our aim is to fly over the top of one book on the Bible each week. Like flying over a city or a great mountain range, we can only look at the big picture and see the main features. We can't land and explore an interesting valley or an old historic building. But my prayer and hope are that after seeing the big picture, you will feel interested and motivated to go back and to do some exploring for yourself on the ground, so to speak. The book of Genesis ended with the death of Joseph and the descendants of Jacob, now called the people of Israel, living very comfortably in the bush and lush pasture lands of the lower Nile. Here they prospered and grew into a large nation within the nation of Egypt. Interestingly, the stage was set for the events recorded in Exodus by a prophecy God spoke to Abraham when he made his covenant with him. This was even before his son Isaac was born. Here it is. Then the Lord said to Abraham, "You can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, where they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. But I will punish the nation that enslaves them, and in the end they will come away with great wealth." That's in Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 to 14. Now Exodus begins by telling us that a new ruler arose who did not know how Joseph had saved Egypt in the time of famine, and saw the Israelites as a threat. So they were enslaved and made to work on massive building projects. In fact, this has been supported by recent archaeological discoveries. Now there are 3 great themes in Exodus which reveal the character of God. God is Saviour, God is Provider, and God is Lawgiver. However, most people associate Exodus with the great and dramatic events of the plagues, the Passover, the nighttime escape and the hurried journey through the wilderness, and the miraculous crossing of the Red Sea and the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai. And quite a few films have been made of these, like the classic Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston as Moses, or DreamWorks' animated epic version Prince of Egypt. Now what we see in all these great events is an amazing picture of God, who is the Saviour and Provider of his people, who fulfilled his promise to Abraham. And we see God acting on all levels, both directing the destiny of nations to the concern with the smallest detail of every individual's welfare. Now, Exodus is dominated by the person and character of Moses, God's servant and friend. God saved the baby Moses from being drowned through the compassion of Pharaoh's daughter. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's court and is provided with the best education in the ancient world. When he was 40, he killed an Egyptian slave driver and fled into the wilderness. But God was with him, and he is given shelter and food, a job, and even a wife by Ruel, a priest in the land of Midian who worshipped the one true God. And Midian was an area which is now on the western seaboard of northern Saudi Arabia. For another 40 years, Moses learned to shepherd sheep and survive in the tough desert wilderness. A huge change from the luxuries of Pharaoh's court. But God was shaping Moses to be his servant who could confront Pharaoh, save his people from slavery and death, and lead them on a great journey through the wilderness to the promised land. Now, through Moses, God demonstrated his power over all the gods of Egypt, including Pharaoh, who was regarded as the son of the god Horus. Now the Pharaoh Moses confronted was probably Amenhotep III, whose firstborn son died. Now interestingly, Amenhotep's second son, Akhenaten, when he became Pharaoh, changed the religion of Egypt to monotheism which was a radical departure from the polytheism of the past, and is probably a result of the confrontation between God and all the gods of Egypt. So the confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh culminated in the plague that killed the firstborn son of every family. God saved from death the firstborn of Israelites who obeyed the instructions of the Passover. And at the Red Sea, God once again dramatically saved his people from annihilation by the pursuing Egyptian army. Not only did God save his people, he also provided for them once they left Egypt. The Israelites were commanded to ask the Egyptians for gifts as they left, and such was the Egyptians' fear of them that they left Egypt loaded with wealth, fulfilling the promise God had given to Abraham so long before. Then, in the wilderness, he turned undrinkable water into good water. He caused the manna to appear on the ground every day, except on the Sabbath, and so taught the people that they should trust him. He showed Moses which rock face to speak to release water stored in it for the people to drink. And in the wilderness, the people were totally dependent on God to survive. It's often forgotten that the Israelites at this stage did not know much about God. But through word and action, God was teaching them about his character and his requirements. The turning point of Exodus is the giving of the law on Mount Sinai, called the Mountain of God. Here on the mountain, God demonstrates his awesome power, technically called a theophany. Exodus 20:18 says, "Now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightning flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off." Now, so dramatic and overwhelming was the experience that the Israelites were terrified, and even Moses was terrified. The reason God revealed himself in this way was simple. They needed to see his power so that they would be slow to sin against him. God had shown himself to be their Saviour and provider, and now he was showing them in a direct and personal way that he is an awesome God of power who they need to honour and worship. This is a balance we today can lose. Because of what Jesus has done, we can enter into the holy presence of God, and we can go up, if you like, with Moses into the presence of God on the mountain. Through Jesus, we know God as Saviour and friend. But the danger of this privilege is that we can lose sight of the fact that he is the awesome God of unlimited power. A lot of people find this second half of Exodus, from chapters 18 onwards to the end, 38, very difficult. It's easy to become overwhelmed with the list of laws which expand the 10 Commandments, and by the lengthy instructions about how the tabernacle was constructed. However, these laws are not just rules and regulations. They reveal the love and care God has for his people in every aspect of their lives. The word law in Hebrew means instruction. The laws are God's instructions which, if followed, will lead to life. The laws are boundaries of behavior. And without boundaries, there can be no mutually beneficial relationship in any circumstance. So these laws establish boundaries of behavior between people and between the people and God. These laws form the basis of the covenant God makes with the people, and it's a conditional covenant. If you do this, I'll do that. An important part of the relationship with God was knowing how to worship him. Remember, the people had no idea how to worship a holy God. They had only known the rituals of idol worship in Egypt. God had to tell them what to do. The instructions about the tabernacle, which is a movable temple, are extremely detailed. The measurements, the materials, the function of the priests and their clothing, the sacrifices, the arrangement on the altar and of the altar, the candlesticks, everything was specified and had to be followed exactly. Now, why was that? Well, the design God gave Moses was unique. Nothing like it had ever existed before. Everything about the tabernacle was filled with many layers of symbolism designed to reveal the nature of God and human nature. And what comes as a surprise is the fact that the more you dig down into the meaning of each feature of the tabernacle, the more you find it points to the person and work of Christ. Now, in such a quick flyover as this, we cannot possibly do justice to this immense topic, but let me just give you one brief example. In the inner court was a golden table with 12 loaves of bread. This was called the bread of the presence. It was a reminder of God's covenant with His people and His provision for them. And this points to Christ, who is the bread of life, the life of the world and the source of life. By giving His body, Christ gives life to His followers. The bread of communion reminds us of God's provision and promises. The book of Genesis ends with the finished tabernacle, which was so filled with the glory of the Lord that even Moses could not enter. The glory and presence of God now dwelt among His people, and this was what God was aiming at. But there was still a very long way to go, both spiritually and physically, before the people were able to be truly His people. And next time, we're going to fly over Leviticus and the journey towards holiness. And if you'd like to dig deeper, here are some discussion questions or things to think about. Have there been situations in your life when, as you look back, you know the Lord saved you from harm, either directly or through the actions of another person, like Pharaoh's daughter saved Moses? And secondly, how easily could your life have been different from what it is now? What were some of the significant turning points? And who influenced you during these turning points? And thirdly, the tabernacle was a place in which the presence of God was seen and experienced. Do you think that there are such special places now where you can sense God's presence more strongly than elsewhere? Well, thank you for joining me on this flyover of the Bible, and I hope that you'll join us for our trip over the top of Leviticus next time. God bless.